and welcome to another Every Tuesday tutorial. In this week's tutorial, I'm going to walk you through 3 simple tricks to create unique watercolor textures. So if you're familiar with me at all, you know that I have recently released 3 different watercolor texture kits, and I really love all the different variations you get. I like incorporating that into my digital graphic design work because I'm able to create outcomes that no one else can replicate. So in an effort to make your work even more unique, this week I want to walk you through 3 simple steps to just take your watercolor texture so much further and different than the typical watercolor textures that you see. So what I'm using for this demonstration is concentrated watercolors, and that's honestly just because they show up much more vibrant on screen. So I am using Dr. Peach Martin's Hydrus concentrated watercolors, and I'll leave a link in the video description to these if you'd like to check them out. So I've got some color in my palette, and I've got 3 different cups so we can walk you through all the different tricks. So first we're going to create just a regular watercolor texture so we can compare it to our others. So I'm going to move this over here a little bit and grab my sheet of paper. This is Canson brand 140 pound cold pressed watercolor paper. It's one of my favorites. I would highly recommend it. I love using it for all of my watercolor textures. So the first thing we're going to do is just from our plain old water cup, nothing special about it at all. We're just going to put a light wash of water on top of the paper. I'm going to grab a little bit of purple, and you can see nothing crazy special happening. Just expanding within the water. I'll put a little blue on here too. Okay, so just a basic watercolor texture right here, just to use for comparison. So the next thing we're going to do, I'm going to set this aside. I'm going to grab another sheet of paper, and the next thing we're going to do is add some salt to our water. So I have about 1.5 cups of water in my water cup right now. This is just regular water, nothing special about it. And I'm using just plain old table salt. There's nothing special about this either. And I have about 1/2 tablespoonful here. Be careful not to drop it. So 1/2 tablespoon, and I'm just going to dump the whole thing in this water cup. And then I'm using a separate brush this time so I can keep everything straight so nothing kind of cross-contaminates. And I'm going to mix that salt into the water and make sure it's fully dissolved before I use it. So now that I've got my water, my salt water all fully mixed, I'm going to once again create a just light wash on top of the paper. So I'm going to go in once again with my brush, and I'm just going to dab so you can see what happens with the salt water. You can see there's kind of a little explosion going on from the salt, so that's pretty cool. I'll grab another spot of blue. It's like a big old eyeball. So these are pretty fun to make. They're fun just to watch. Little explosions. And they're kind of hairy. The edges are long and kind of have these little lines in them. So that is salt water, so that's pretty fun. So that is trick number 1. So we're going to move right into trick number 2. I'm going to set this one aside, and you can see as we compare it to just regular watercolor, just water with watercolor, and then we've got the salt water. Okay, I'm going to set this aside, and we're going to move on to trick number 2. So I got my paper again, and this time we're going to put some bleach into our water. So I've got a little container of bleach right here. It's just your household regular bleach that you would use for your laundry. And I've got a little eyedropper. So I'm going to grab a little bit of bleach, and then in my water cup, I'm going to drop in, once again, I've got about 1.5 cups of water right here, and I'm going to drop in 5 drops. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So once again, I'm using a different brush for this so I don't cross-contaminate anything. I don't want to put any salt from the bristles of this brush into my bleach cup. So I've got my other paintbrush. I'm going to mix it really thoroughly to make sure that bleach gets all through the water. And now I'm going to paint a light wash again, just like we did before. Okay, so I'm going to pick up some blue so we can do a direct comparison to our salt water. So I'm just going to drop a little bit of color on just like I did before. You can see this one's far more spidery in nature. It doesn't kind of explode in the same way that the salt did. Drop a little bit of purple on here too. So these explode kind of in a different way than what we saw with the salt. All right, so moving on to trick number 3. I'm going to set this one aside. And so trick number 3 is pretty fun. I've got some basic cling wrap, nothing super special about this. Actually, I'm going to move this sheet of paper aside. And I'm going to try and flatten it as much as I can here. And this is all I'm using, just like what you'd use with your food in the fridge. So just regular saran wrap. I'm getting it pretty flat. And so I'm just going to paint a light wash right on top of the saran wrap. And I'm going to keep it kind of limited to the area because when we put the watercolor paper on top of it, we don't want the water to go everywhere. So, and it's kind of hard to see the water when it's on top of the saran wrap. So kind of make a mental note of where you're putting your water here. So I'm going to keep it kind of right in the center. All right, so now I'm going to put in some color. So I'm going to grab a little bit of blue. And it's just going to look like little pools of color at first, little puddles. But it will get really cool. Put a little bit of pink in here. Mix it up a little. Maybe a little bit of dark blue too. Down here, just to mix it up. Okay, so that looks good. And now, this is the fun part because you never know what's gonna happen here. We've got our watercolor paper and I'm gonna try and make sure I cover as much of this as possible. And then I'm just gonna press right into it. Looks like I got some coming out right here. I'm gonna grab a paper towel, grab that before I flip it. All right, so now we're just gonna flip it over. And you can rub it out, or if you like the texture that you're getting, which these edges are pretty interesting, minus this kind of messed up area. Let's kind of push things around to try and fix it a little bit. This is the nice thing, like if you see parts that you don't like, you can actually move the color around a little bit to get like more interesting edges going on, which is kind of fun. I don't like pushing too many things around because I like all these little areas, like these edges I would never get with a brush. So that's what makes this so cool. And you get little pockets of areas that maybe don't have a bunch of color. You can smooth some of those out if you don't like them, or you can just leave them and keep the character. So that's looking really, really cool. So then you're just gonna lift off, one full pull, throw your saran wrap away, and let your texture dry. So that is the saran wrap. Trick number 3. Here is trick number 1. It's almost totally dry now. This is the salt water, which is really soft and kind of atmospheric. And then here is our bleach test, which kind of expands out more so than what you see with the salt, kind of an eyeball here, whereas this is kind of just pulling away, which is pretty cool. And then here was the very first one that we did with just the basic watercolor texture. So pretty cool seeing them all together. So that is how to create unique watercolor textures using 3 different tricks. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please subscribe. I release a new design tutorial every single Tuesday. And don't forget to head on over to my blog, every-tuesday.com, for even more design tutorials and a bunch of design freebies. And don't forget to click the link in the video description for everything that was mentioned in this video. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next week.